Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Today, this webinar series is sponsored by the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development and the Alaska Comprehensive Center in partnership with Education Northwest. We are happy that you are here today. This is the fourth webinar in the series of 6. We focused on the first webinar on phonemic awareness, the second on phonics and advanced phonics. The third webinar focused on fluency, and today's webinar focuses on rigorous vocabulary instruction. We are happy you are here, and we are ready to get started. Today there may be some instances where I ask you to stop the webinar, pause it for a moment, and turn to and talk to your partner or have a group discussion if you are with other folks. At that time, if you are by yourself, if you will please pause the webinar also and take some notes or do some reflective thinking, then just push unpause and we'll be ready to resume the vocabulary work today. Also, you'll notice in the materials that you have been asked to have ready 2 videos from the Anita Archer Explicit Instruction website. One of those videos is the wolf video, and that will be the first one that we use, and it's from her website, so I'm hoping that you have that downloaded and ready to view. I will pause the webinar for your viewing pleasure, and we aren't able to do it through the video system because the streaming is too difficult. So in the directions, we've asked you to be sure to download the webinar and have it ready, or the video and have it ready. The second one is vocabulary instruction in 2nd grade, and that's the second one that we will use with embedded instruction. So you will need your materials ready with you today. You have an instructional routine card that accompanies this webinar, and then the 2 videos that were downloaded. I have also downloaded the script for you and provided those 2 scripts for the wolf video and the 2nd grade vocabulary video from Anita, just in case you have trouble with your video system while we're in the middle of this webinar. So you can also read the script. It's not as good as watching the video, but you could read the script and get the same idea. So we are ready to begin if you have all of your materials ready. This is a pretty intense webinar in terms of being material dependent, so I'm hoping that you are all ready to go. All right, very good, thank you. Here are our goals for this session today. Understand the research on the importance of vocabulary development. And it's one thing to know what the research says in terms of our students and their vocabulary acquisition, but it's the other to really understand what does effective vocabulary instruction look like. How do we provide explicit, systematic instruction that really raises the vocabulary level of all of our kids? So we're going to spend time today in 2 different mechanisms of vocabulary instruction. One is called embedded instruction, and the other is called extended instruction. And those are the 2 videos that we'll be watching. The first one with Wolf is the embedded instruction, and the second one with 2nd grade vocabulary is extended instruction. Then we're actually going to practice both of those opportunities. When Anita does the vocabulary work in the videos, it looks so much easier than it is, and so I want you to get a chance to actually practice it and get rhythmic with it. What we found with vocabulary instruction is there are 2 key areas that we really have to focus on as teachers. Number 1 is preparation. Really strong vocabulary instruction is not able to be delivered off the cuff or by winging it. Number 1, we haven't thought about the words deeply enough. Number 2, we haven't selected the right words. Number 3, we haven't planned our examples and non-examples and our student-friendly definition and planned our routine for delivering our vocabulary instruction. So we want to be really careful that we don't think about vocabulary as ancillary, and that we spend significant time planning for, being efficient with, and executing strong instruction. Many of you have probably seen this study and are well aware of the vocabulary gaps that exist between groups of kids This is the seminal work done by Hart and Riesling. And what this really shows us is that students who were in welfare or students who come from families living in poverty have an impact of far fewer words that they are exposed to in their life. So they did some studies and they noticed that students who live in poverty hear about 620 words per hour, which translates to 62,000 per week, 3 million a year, and 10 million in 3 years. Compared to students who live in professional homes with families who have white-collar jobs, those students hear about 2,150 words an hour, which translates to 215,000 words in a week, 11 million in a year, and 30 million over the course of 3 years. So for the students that we work with, it's really important for us to understand this data, because it isn't that vocabulary development is going to be really built at home. And it is part of our job as educators to do everything we can to close that gap. And so sometimes just revisiting the concept that our students have very critical need for us to attend to the concept of vocabulary, to build it efficiently and build it effectively. There are so many words in our language. It's very interesting. As we look at the Russian language has about 400,000 words in it, and our language has over 1 million words in it. So it is virtually impossible to teach our kids every single word that could be coming up in their world in a really deep way. So we want to pay very close attention to how can we maximize that opportunity, and how do we select the words that we're going to teach, and how do we be efficient with our instruction, because it's highly unlikely that we will be able to teach all of the words in our language with tremendous depth. Nor do kids need to know every single word in our language with tremendous depth. When we think about when does vocabulary instruction begin, we really know actually that it begins from birth, and that students little ones who are born, who have mothers and fathers and grandparents and aunties and uncles who talk to them regularly and build their oral language skills from birth, are far better prepared with vocabulary when they enter into school. This chart shows school entry, but I just want to take a moment to look at it. So one of the things you notice is that in vocabulary and comprehension for kindergarten through first grade, the majority of vocabulary is listening vocabulary, and that then at the beginning of first grade, it begins the transition into reading vocabulary. But for those of you who teach young kids, your big part of your day is to build their vocabulary development in a listening format, and we'll do some embedded instruction for that today. Then, for those of you who teach older kids, your job is really to help them build their reading vocabulary so that when they approach a text, they are very familiar with the words that they are coming across, or they have some strategies to be able to figure out the meaning of those words. And that is more focused on something we call extended vocabulary, which we will also spend time with today. What are the characteristics of explicit vocabulary instruction? Really, when we think about this, there are varying degrees of effective vocabulary instruction, and we really don't have any extra time to be implementing strategies that are not effective and research-based. So here are some characteristics or attributes of effective instruction. Number one, the instruction is clear and unambiguous. So let me give you an example of ambiguous vocabulary instruction. A teacher is reading along, reading a read aloud to the students, and she comes to a word that might be unfamiliar to the students, and that word might be concentrate. So the teacher comes to the word in the text, she's chosen it as a word, and she says to the students, what do you think concentrate means? What is the definition of concentrate? So all the students are raising their hands, and beginning to share what they think the meaning of concentrate is. That leaves the instruction very ambiguous. A couple of things happen there. Number one, who raises their hands to show the definition? Likely the student who may already know the definition. So that's something we call teach to the best and leave the rest. So the students who actually are unclear about the definition aren't able to engage, number one. Also, you have a high possibility of a student raising their hand and giving the definition of concentrate that is either inaccurate or incomplete. So then all of the other students in the class are hearing an inaccurate, incomplete definition of concentrate for the very first time. And we know from our body of research that students need to be taught the correct and accurate mechanism first, and then they practice that, rather than learning the inaccurate and incorrect version of something and then trying to provide corrective feedback. So one of the things we want to be really clear about is our instruction is clear and it is unambiguous. We leave much less to discovery and much more for instruction. Then the instruction involves the presentation of word meanings and contextual examples. So students aren't left to guess the meaning of concentrate. We actually present the word meaning and give them a student-friendly definition of what concentrate means. Then we give them contextual examples. Here's a time when you really have to concentrate. Here's a time when you might not need to concentrate. Here's an example of concentrating. Here's an example of not concentrating. Giving students contextual examples so that the word comes to life for them and has relevance in their background knowledge. Multiple exposures to the word are provided. So the number of repetitions that students need to hear a word has everything to do with how well they learn it. And so being able to hear a word once or twice or three times for some students might be sufficient, but for most it is not. So providing multiple exposures to that word, both inside of your instruction and outside of your instruction throughout the day. Then the other is being sure that sufficient instructional time is dedicated to vocabulary. What we have found with bodies of research is the amount of time we really spend on explicit vocabulary instruction is quite small, and that we have to really dedicate a time in our both our reading instruction, our math instruction, science instruction, social studies instruction to be set aside for vocabulary within that text. And that students are actively engaged in the instruction. Just to have the spray and pray or the distributed vocabulary instruction towards the kids is not sufficient. They need to be engaged with the words, interacting with the words, practicing the words, thinking about the words, writing the words, using the words. That's actually where we get the best bang for our buck. So I'm going to go back for a minute. Instruction is clear and ambiguous. Instruction involves the presentation of word meanings and examples. Multiple exposures to the words are provided, sufficient instructional time is devoted, and students are actively engaged. So I'm going to use a close method with you. When I turn to the next slide, I want you to see if you can fill in the words that we just spoke about. If you have to look back, you can. I would love to challenge you to see if you can not have to look back. So if you'll study this slide for just a moment about the characteristics of effective vocabulary instruction, and then we'll turn to the new slide, and you can fill in the answers. So I'll give you 1 minute to study. All right, very good. So let's see how you can do. Oops, sorry. Actually, I guess I didn't tuck that in there like I thought I did. I will be sure that you get that opportunity. Sorry about that. So instruction is clear and ambiguous. Good. Very good. So you notice that the bold words are the words that hold the most meaning. Very good. Thank you. All right. So we notice in the research of Kevin Feldman and Kate Kinsella, this is really the foundation of why we would deliver explicit vocabulary instruction. Sometimes if your job is to share professional development with other folks or to really communicate with your peers about why we would use explicit vocabulary instruction compared to other kinds of vocabulary instruction, we need a few resources to help us understand the foundation. So this article really helps us understand why we would use explicit instruction when we are teaching vocabulary, and I just thought you might appreciate having it as a resource. When we think about explicit vocabulary instruction, we also want to be very thoughtful about the words that we choose to teach. So as we mentioned, there are so many words in our language, and it's not feasible to teach them the meanings and the depth of knowledge for every word. So we want to really think about the limited number of vocabulary words that we teach. When I speak about this, I really want to reiterate, especially with the new standards that are coming forth in our country and in Alaska, that vocabulary instruction is an all-day, everyday thing. So it is not the responsibility of the language arts teachers, of the reading teachers. It is the responsibility of all of us. If you are delivering a science lesson, there are absolutely words in that science lesson that need to be explicitly taught for the understanding of the text and the depth of understanding even the science concepts. And the same is true with social studies. All social studies lessons would have a set of vocabulary words that need to be addressed, so that students can really capture the meaning of that content. So this is really about all of us all day long, and that how do we choose the limited number of vocabulary words for really strong instruction. Typically, 3 to 10 words per story, portion of the story, selection of the chapter, chunk of material. If you're reading an article, 3 to 10 words would be something you would use for deep instruction. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And you also would briefly tell the students the meaning of the other words for comprehension. So let's go back to bullet number 2 for a minute. So 3 to 10 words really represents the extended vocabulary instruction. So will you just write a note there, extended vocabulary. In the third bullet, you briefly tell the students the meaning of the other words. That's really embedded instruction. So we'll spend more time with that, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into embedded and extended. And you choose a few words for extended, and you do more words in a broad sense for embedded. When we think about how to choose the words, here are some criteria for you to be thinking about. Number 1, you want to choose the words that are unknown. It doesn't do us any good to waste our time on vocabulary instruction with words that they actually know. The other is you want to choose words that are critical to the passage, critical to the content of the text. Then you also want to choose, the late Stephen Stahl did wonderful work in researching vocabulary, and he found that we want to choose words that students are likely to encounter in the future. Isabel Beck and Margaret McEwen have done lots of research in this area also, and they say focus on Tier 2 words. So I want to go back for a minute when I'm introducing this thing of Tier 2. I'm going to spend some more time on it, but I want to be really clear at the very onset of our work. Many of you are using the RTI system. In the summer that Sharon Vaughn was doing her basic research on Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions, Isabel Beck and Margaret McEwen were also doing research on vocabulary words. And each of them, without realizing it, labeled their areas of study with the categories of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. So in the research for RTI, Tier 1 is what all students receive for core instruction. Tier 2 is supplemental intervention or instruction, and Tier 3 is intense intervention. So that's the RTI research that was happening in the summer with Sharon Vaughn. Also in that very same summer, Isabel Becca and Margaret McEwen were doing research on which words to choose for vocabulary instruction. They labeled Tier 1 as words that every student probably knows already, and we don't need to do much instruction there. Tier 2 were words that are high frequency and relevant to much of the passages that we read. And Tier 3 are words that are usually content-specific, disciplinary-specific words, or are very infrequent. So I just wanted to back up for a moment because you may often hear Tier 1, 2, and 3 in those two given contexts. And they mean something very different, and they are all researchers in the area of reading. They actually just hadn't had any conversation. They developed their work in the very same summer and came out with it, and they have the very same labels. So I wanted to be really, really clear about that because a lot of folks in the nation have asked me and get those two labels mixed up. So Becca and McEwen say we should focus our instruction on Tier 2 words. And they say we also should focus our instruction on academic vocabulary. When we do the secondary literacy or reading instruction, you'll hear more about academic vocabulary in that session as well. Also, we want to be sure to select words that are more difficult to obtain. And words that they have an abstract meaning to them, or an abstract concept versus concrete. The concrete words are much easier to teach, and the abstract words are really hard for kids to grasp. And then we also want to teach words that have an unknown concept. So the concept behind the word is pretty unfamiliar to the kids. That's important for us to then pay attention. And words that are not adequately explained within the text. So if we find a word that really isn't supported around it for kids to be able to understand the meaning, we want to be sure to pull those words out and give instruction as well. Very good. So here's the one that I actually thought I had tucked in. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to study this, and then I'll give you a chance to take a little bit of a quiz and see how much of this you remember. So we select words that are unknown. We select words that are critical to the passage. We select words that they will encounter in the future, and words that are difficult to obtain. I'll give you 30 seconds to study this, then I will turn to the quiz. Okay, here we go. Let's see how you do. Fill in the words. Okay, super. Let's see how you did. So we select words that are unknown. Good. We select words that are critical to the passage. Nice. Select words that students will encounter in the future. Good. And select words that are more difficult to obtain. Nice job. Let's see how we did. Good. Beautiful job. Nice work. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the Becca McEwen research. So Tier 1 words, they are basic words that most students will know without instruction. Chair, bed, happy, house, funny, dog, laugh, those kinds of things. Tier 2 words, they are words that we use generally, but they might not be common or common in understanding. So general academic vocabulary words. Anytime you have academic vocabulary, it's important that we teach it, especially with our ELL students. Here are some examples. Concentrate, absurd, fortunate, relieved, dignity. As you look at this list of words, you can actually see that there are some words that hold abstract concepts in them. Absurd. So absurd is a pretty abstract concept for kids, and also it may hold quite a bit of relevance to the text that they are reading. So it's very important that they would be able to really understand and master that word, absurd. Analyze. Analyze is a good academic vocabulary word. We often ask kids in our state tests to analyze something. And without understanding that vocabulary word, they're not actually sure of what the task is before them. So they may actually understand the concept within the question, but they aren't sure about the word analyze and what they are being asked to do. Convenient. Convenient is also a pretty abstract word. It's a word that we see in text all the time. And so it's an important one for us to be able to bring up and provide instruction. So Tier 3 words, they are rare and they are limited typically to a specific domain. And they usually require some background vocabulary, and it's part of our job to make sure that if we do teach a Tier 3 word, that it's related to building their background vocabulary as well as understanding the specific discipline or domain in front of us. So you'll notice the word tundra on this list of Tier 3. This is a really important place for us to talk about context, because in Alaska, tundra might be a Tier 1 word because of where you live and because tundra might even be their home. So also when you're selecting your words, you have to be very cognizant of where you are in the country, where you are geographically, where you are in a given context with exposure to things. So let's take the words sacrifice fly. So I was in a classroom the other day and the teacher said, and they were reading the text and it said, and the batter hit a sacrifice fly. So let's think for a minute if you were an ELL student. So fly, okay, so they read the word fly, and what do you think they think about? Right, the insect. And then sacrifice fly, this is not only an insect, it is an insect that sacrifices its life on behalf of something. So every now and then there are Tier 3 words that we really have to attend to because they might have a multiple meaning, or our ELL students might be likely to use context and misunderstand the meaning of the word. So we all know, if you have any understanding of baseball, that a sacrifice fly is when you hit a fly ball, but actually the other runner advances even though you're out. But if you're a student who doesn't have background there and doesn't understand that fly is not an insect and that the sacrifice is really about a game of baseball, not that the fly gives up its life for something, you really miss the comprehension within the passage. So Tier 3 words are important for us to think about. Is that experience likely to happen for kids with this new word? You'll notice that Tier 2 words are bolded. That bullet number 2 is bolded. And that's because that's where we want to spend the majority of our vocabulary instructional time. As you look through materials, the reading programs and science texts and social studies texts, most of them now have identified vocabulary. Our job, when we look at that vocabulary list, is to look and see, are there any Tier 1 words on there that we wouldn't have to teach much? Are there any Tier 3 words on there that we just need to teach briefly? And which of the words on that vocabulary list really are Tier 2 words that really deserve our bulk of our instructional time? So just because you have a textbook that has a list of vocabulary words doesn't mean that they are all equal. And it's part of our job as educators to be sure that we are really making good decisions about how to spend our vocabulary time and where to put the emphasis. Here's an example. So down at the bottom, you'll see the words clock, baby, happy. Those are Tier 1 words. Most of those words kids know before they enter school. If you move over to Tier 2, sinister, fortunate, adapt, those words are Tier 2, and they're actually quite abstract, right? So, and they might not be, the meaning might not be inherent in the text. So sinister, that word holds a lot of potential that the text around it might not support that word well enough, so we'd want to be sure to teach it. So these are words that appear frequently in texts and which students have probably a conceptual understanding. So let's take sinister for a minute. What's a synonym of sinister? A synonym of sinister might be evil, right? So do you think most students know evil? Probably. So evil, sinister, they have some kind of a conceptual understanding about that word. They just don't know that word in depth. Let's take fortunate. How about the word lucky? Or fortune. So if you receive a fortune, you receive something big, something good, something wonderful. So lucky, fortune, those are two concepts behind that word that really help students connect to fortunate. Adapt. Do they know change? Do they know metamorphosis? Do they know, my guess is they know a couple of words about adapt that can help them with a conceptual understanding of the word adapt, meaning change or adjust. Then you look at Tier 3 words. Those are words that are uncommon, and they're associated typically with a specific discipline: isotope, peninsula, bucolic. So it's important that they understand what those words mean for the text and the concept, but you wouldn't spend a ton of time on them unless they are actually really related to the domain that you're speaking about. Will you pause the webinar for a minute and turn and talk to your partners about something that you've learned so far about explicit vocabulary instruction? I've done a lot of teaching, and I'd like you to turn and talk to your partners for a minute about a couple of things that might have been confirmed or new for you in thinking about explicit vocabulary instruction. I'll see you back in a couple of minutes. Great. Welcome back. It's time for us to think a little bit about what our current vocabulary instruction actually looks like. In a minute, I'm going to show you a chart that was developed by Kevin Feldman. He and Kate Kinsella have done lots of work on vocabulary. I'm going to show you page 1 of something called a high-quality vocabulary instruction audit. What this really is a tool for us to self-assess. And it's also, the entire audit is a tool that schools and leadership teams and principals can use to see how well they're doing vocabulary work. So we're going to look at page 1. What I'd like you to do after we talk about it for a minute is identify one high priority area that you could focus on for your school or for your classroom. If you're there as a team, you might be looking at how to focus on something school-wide. If you're there as a teacher in your own room, you might be looking at what you would like to focus on in your classroom. So then I'd like you to be thinking about, during this webinar, how are some ways that you could be improving or addressing that gap in your instructional repertoire. So here's the page 1 of the audit. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to rate yourself on, do you use varied explicit approaches when you work on your word learning? Do you always deliver your vocabulary in the same way? Are you providing explicit approaches where kids actually have lots of support in learning those new words? How are you doing in choosing your target words? So we just spent some time on Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. How are you doing in being sure that those words are the appropriate words, mostly focusing on Tier 2? And then quality of student-friendly definition. So lots of times when I get a long time, a full-day session to work with folks on vocabulary, I will bring up words from the Webster Dictionary. And sometimes just reading some of those technical definitions makes it really clear for us that kids need to have student-friendly definitions so that they can actually access the meaning of those words. So how do you do with that? How do you do in terms of delivering consistent instructional routines for initial instruction of a word and then review? Do you have a pattern that you deliver reading instruction, vocabulary instruction consistently and in a mechanism that's efficient and effective? And I'll show you one of those today. And we found it to be very helpful with students as they are learning new words. Then also, do you build your instructional routines for vocabulary on the gradual release of responsibility model? That's a really big set of words that really means I do it first, you do it with me, we do it together a couple of times, so we do it together, we do it together, we do it together, and then eventually you do it. So it's about explaining, modeling, guided practice, and eventually independent practice. I have to say that the majority of vocabulary instruction I see looks like this. Here is a list of your vocabulary words that goes along with our lesson today. I'd like you to look those words up. I'd like you to write them in your vocabulary notebook and look up the definitions in the glossary in the back. When you've done that, we'll go on to the next activity. That is the majority of the vocabulary instruction I see. That doesn't have any of the approaches of the gradual release model. So a gradual release model would look like, students, here are 3 vocabulary words we're going to encounter in our text today. I'm going to start by giving you a student-friendly definition of each of these. I'm going to give you some examples, non-examples, and then I'm going to give you a chance to, then we're going to work on these words together, and by the end I'm going to ask you to do an activity that helps you use those words before we read the text. That's very different than, students, please write your vocabulary in your book and look up the definition in the glossary. So how do you do that? How do you do with making sure there are frequent and multiple exposures to words, distributed practice, lots of opportunities for varied responses, and active engagement in deep processing of words? So I'm actually going to give you a moment because I really do want you to rate yourself. And no one's looking, so please be honest, and because that's the only way we get better in our profession is being open and honest with ourselves and finding areas that we really think we could work on. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to work on this, so if you'll pause the webinar for a little bit, and then we'll come back together in 3 minutes, all right? See you in a minute. Very good. I hope you have found a couple of areas that you would like to learn more about and improve upon, and we'll get busy doing some of that. So before we look at the first video today, I want to talk about embedded instruction. This type of vocabulary instruction is done when you have a read aloud. So read alouds can be done at any age with any content. You can have a read aloud that you do with social studies content. You may have a social studies article. You may have something out of the newspaper that's related. You may have a piece of text that was written up on the internet. So one of the first jobs you do is think about, is this a piece of text that I want to help with the concept development, and so I'm going to read it aloud to the kids so they can begin to understand this concept. And when you do a read aloud, when you're thinking about vocabulary, you think about it in this way. The words are given a simple explanation. So we use a variety of mechanisms with this, but lots of words are taught in a thin way. So you may choose 15 words from that article to expose students to in the middle of your reading, but you're not going to go in depth with all of them. You're going to do a broad, quick explanation as you go, and we'll see this in a minute. Why would we use this approach? Number one, it is time efficient. It allows us to introduce a lot of words. So remember, we said that it's not possible for us to teach all words in depth, but we can introduce lots of words with this embedded instruction strategy. And it also then gives a few exposure to targeted words. And you're not really going to go in depth, but let's say you introduce 15 words in the read aloud. Of those 15 words, you may choose 3 to 5 to go deeper with, and that's extended instruction. So embedded instruction would come when it's not critical that they have an in-depth understanding of any of those words. Extended instruction happens when you pull 3 to 5 of those words out and spend more time. So in a moment, I would like you to pull up your video or your script with Anita Archer. And what we have learned is that the more we can know what we're looking for when we are observing teaching practice, the more effective we are at seeing the right thing. So here are the things I want you to look for today. What strategies did Anita use to introduce new vocabulary? She was very, very precise in her strategies. So what were the strategies she used? I'd also like you to keep a list of the number of words that she does embedded instruction with during her lesson. You'll find that you'll have to work hard because she has a lot of words that she supports for kids as she reads. How did she attend to efficient pacing in her vocabulary instruction? One of the greatest issues within vocab instruction is actually pacing. So many times we take one word and we will spend 15 minutes on one word, and actually we could have tucked in 4 or 5 or 6 words in that 15-minute time frame had we attended to our pacing. And last of all, what engagement strategies did she employ? She's the master of engagement, and you'll notice she used lots of engagement strategies to keep kids interacting with the words, even though she was teaching them in a broad sense. So what I'd like you to do now, I'm going to leave this PowerPoint slide up. What I would like you to do is minimize the webinar, pull up your video, the one that's labeled Wolf, and please attend to these questions as you are watching. When you are finished watching the video, what I would like you to do is turn and talk to your partners about what you noticed. So please be sure you have a partner with you if you have a group or someone to visit with. If you do not have someone with you today, I will do a review of this right after, but I wanted to make sure that first you watch the video, take your notes on these questions, and then talk to your partners about what you saw. Then please resume the video, and we'll come back and process the work that we saw. So the video is about 5 minutes long, and then there will be a brief discussion. So we will be offline probably for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then resume your video, and we will be back. All right. Thank you. Enjoy the video. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Wonderful. Isn't she amazing with that? As I watch her work, I'm inspired each time that I watch her. Before I talk about the mechanisms or the approaches that she used, I do want to bring up one thing. The reason that Anita can be so efficient with her work is that she is well planned. She had read that story ahead of time. She had chosen the words ahead of time. She had assigned a gesture or a synonym or a definition or an explanation ahead of time. This was not the first time she read the story or the passage, and she had thoughtfully gone through and labeled in a very quick sense which words and what is her approach going to be. Because it looks super easy, but once you get to that book or the article or the passage, if you are not well planned, it's very difficult to think off the top of your head and have the instruction be targeted and right on. So let's talk about some of the things she did. In the embedded strategy, she used gestures. So she peered. She used synonyms. So she would say, concentrate. Actually, let me use concentrate for different ones. So she would use a synonym to help kids find that relationship with the word. She would use a student-friendly definition. So, for example, concentrate, she would say that means to think really, really hard. Concentrate. Or a student-friendly definition, she would just take a second, not long, take a little bit of time to explain in a student-friendly way what that word is. Or she would act it out when she would howl. Ooh, that was an example of acting it out. One bullet here on acting it out. Acting it out is not a full drama. She didn't have to have a full dramatic play about the word howl. She just briefly acted out howl. So those were some of the strategies that she built right into her read aloud. And how many words did you find that she gave students exposure to? I have 14, that in this little amount of time, 5 minutes, she gave exposure in one of these ways to 14 different words. It doesn't mean that the kids have a deep understanding of those words, but they are now beginning to hear them. So go back to our very first piece of data with students who live in poverty, students who live in rural or remote areas who may not have exposure to some of the words that she was talking about. Now, in 5 minutes, 14 words, they heard 14 new words. So that is embedded instruction, and we should be very thoughtful about that every time we do a read aloud or every time we read aloud some work in our discipline level instruction. So now I would like you to practice. It looks so easy when Anita's doing it. So what I would like you to do, I'm going to turn to a passage in a minute on the next slide. What I would like you to do is think about which words should we choose. Remembering tier 1, 2, and 3, remembering your context and where you live. Choose some words that you think would be important in this passage. Then I want you to choose an embedded strategy. So I'll go back to this slide for a moment. A gesture, a synonym, a student-friendly definition, a student-friendly explanation, act it out. So think about that. So your job for the next couple of minutes, I'll give you about 4 minutes for this. This is about all it usually takes. When I put the passage up, on the left of this chart, you're going to record the words that you think your students should know. And also depending on the age of your students, if you have a student in the 2nd grade, you would choose different words than if you have students in the 6th grade. So be thinking about your kids as well. All right? Okay, here's your passage. Great, thank you. If you forgot to pause the webinar while you're doing that, please pause and finish. And if you did pause your webinar and you're back, great, let's get busy. So, some of the words that people have chosen over the course of time when we have done this passage is the word eventually. Eventually is a little bit of an abstract word, and yet they are going to see that word over and over and over again in their reading career. So it would definitely be a tier 2 word. Eventually, a lot of folks usually do a student-friendly explanation of that word. A lot of folks choose the word grueling. Grueling is also abstract, but they are likely to see it many times in their reading career. Grueling, a lot of times folks use a synonym or act out a grueling experience, an experience that's really, really difficult, really, really hard to carry out is grueling. It makes you sweat, makes you tired. It's very, very hard. Compelling, that's another word that a lot of folks use, compelling, and choose, because it's also a bit abstract. It may take a student-friendly explanation. It may even take an example or two for kids to understand compelling. So you get the idea. The idea is really to look at the passage that you're going to read aloud. Choose the words that in your context you think would be Tier 2 words, or a Tier 3 word that might need a brief introduction. And then be prepared. So the whole idea of this is to be prepared. All you have to write is gesture, synonym, act out, right near the word, or on a Post-it. I've seen teachers take the 5 or the 14 vocabulary words, put them on a Post-it, and have a quick symbol for themselves so they know, that's a synonym, that's a definition I was going to give, that's an explanation, I'm going to act that one out. The whole key to embedded instruction for vocabulary is about preparation. It's not that hard to do. It's not rocket science in terms of doing it. The difficult part is being well enough planned and disciplined enough, having it be habitual, so that every time we read aloud any piece of text, we have this vocabulary approach. Very good. So that was embedded instruction. Now I want us to work a little bit on extended instruction. This is where you take a few words and you go much more deeply. Extended instruction happens after you're done reading the story or the passage, not in the middle. So in the middle, as you're reading, you would use embedded, and afterwards is when you pull out the key words. Another piece of this would be if you have vocabulary words that you want to pre-teach before you read a passage, you use this routine, this strategy. So extended instruction happens either before or after. Embedded instruction, as with its name, happens within. Extended is before and after, embedded is within. So many, many times we find that we should have pre-taught vocabulary so that students can really gather the comprehension of the text. So use the very same routine that we're going to go through here today. Why would you use this strategy? What would be the purpose behind it? Really, you use this one because you want the students to have lots of different practices with the word. And you want their knowledge on a word to be deeper than just exposure. The reason that we're very intentional about before or after is that it actually takes time. Extended vocabulary instruction is time intensive, and we have to be thoughtful about how we use that time and how many words we use that time with. So you typically use 3 to 5 words on a given passage. Okay? So it's time for us to spend time with the next video. And this is the video on second grade vocabulary instruction. And as we did with the first video, there are some things I want you to watch for. Number 1, what strategies did she use to develop a deep understanding? Remember, her goal was a deep understanding of a few words. How did she attend to pacing? So this is even more important. As you're doing a read aloud, pacing is important, but really as you're doing extended instruction, it is critical. Oftentimes we can get very tangential with our instruction on extended vocabulary instruction. We tell the kids a word, and we tell them a long story related to the word that eventually takes them off into Siberia, and they have completely lost the concept of the word. So being very careful that we are attending to our pacing and that everything we're doing, every word we say, every activity or interaction that we choose is focused on deepening their understanding of that word. Then she also employs, as always, engagement strategies. So when you pull up the video, I will leave this slide up. What I'd like you to do is, as we did with the last one, pull up the video, watch it, or read the script, then talk to your partner about what you noticed and what you saw, and then we will do a quick review. So this video is about 6 minutes, so I think it's a little bit longer, if I remember right. So we should have about 10 minutes again of break time from this webinar dialogue from me. So please pull up the video, watch it, take notes, talk to your partners, and then resume the webinar once you have done that. Very good. We'll see you when you're done. Great. Welcome back. I hope you had a great discussion and took great notes and found all kinds of wonderful things in the video. Let's look and see what we found. What were her follow-up activities? She pronounced the words and she broke them into syllables. The word is concentrate. What's the word? Concentrate. Very good. Let's read it. Let's break it into parts. Concentrate. Say it with me. Concentrate. What's the word? Concentrate. Right. What's the word? Concentrate. So she actually pronounced the word lots of different times and broke it into syllables for kids and had them work with it. Impressed. The word is impressed. What's the word? Impressed. Impressed. Say it with me. Impressed. What's the word? Impressed. She then gave a student-friendly definition. Concentrate means to really, really think about something, to give all your attention to it. So she gave a friendly definition. Then she gave examples. Would this be concentrating? And she did a thumbs up, thumbs down. Here's an example of concentrating, a non-example, and she used a little girl of, if you saw this little girl looking here, looking there, she would not be able to concentrate. So she gave examples and non-examples. One of the things we find with this instruction is that we tend to give examples, but we don't always discipline ourselves to give non-examples. And it's the non-example that creates the contrast for kids. So it's a great thing to be thinking about those words together, example, non-example. So if you're going to give examples, see if you can discipline yourself to give a couple of non-examples as well so that the contrast is there for kids in what the word is and what the word is not. Then the yes-no activity. So that's just a quick way for response. So she did thumbs up, she did yes-no, so that she could get active engagement with kids. Is this an example of concentrate, yes or no? Yes, good. And then she also did sentence stems. I was impressed because, or I would be impressed because, so that kids have a way to enter into the conversation. We know from research that students who are working on their language acquisition, that one of the hardest parts for them is to get their sentence started. So being able to say, I was impressed because, I was impressed because, then they have a way to enter in and they can add to the context of what they're trying to say. So she used sentence stems. Very good. Hopefully you found those things. Nice. It looks so easy, but we need to take a bit of time to practice. So here's what I would like you to do. A few minutes ago, you chose some of the words from Libby's dog Iditarod race passage. I would like you to choose just one of those words for a minute. Maybe you chose eventually, maybe you chose compelling, maybe you chose grueling. Whatever word you chose, choose one of them. And then I would like you to do the following things. I would like you to break that word into syllables and practice pronouncing it and introducing it like Anita did. Then I'd like you to quickly do a student-friendly definition. This should not be long. It should not be laborious. If it takes that long to write, it would take too long for kids to understand. So a quick definition. Then I would like you to give a couple examples of that word. For grueling, let's see. An example of grueling might be pulling, let's see, I'm trying to think of something really big and really heavy out in rural Alaska. Something grueling might be running a marathon or running from Teller to Nome. Let's say you're out in the Bering Strait. Something grueling would be to be able to run from Teller to Nome, which would be a grueling activity. Sitting on your couch watching TV eating ice cream would not be grueling. So you want examples and non-examples. And then see if you can think of a quick yes-no question or two, and see if you can do a quick sentence stem. This takes a little bit, takes about 5 or 6 minutes to really discipline yourself. I'm going to leave this up, and once you have your work done, I'd like you to turn and share it with your partner. So this is a solo activity at first for you to complete bullet number 2. with a word, and then I'd like you to turn and share it with your partner. Right? So we will be offline on the webinar for probably about 7 or 8 minutes. Okay? Please pause the webinar. I'll see you back in about 7 or 8 minutes. Thank you. Very good. Welcome back. It's a little harder than it looks, isn't it, at first? And you can really see the idea of preparation. So let's say you're teaching a science lesson on photosynthesis, and you were to choose 3 to 5 words that are pretty important in the idea of photosynthesis and pretty important in the passage that kids are going to read. So being able to take those 3 or 4 words and break them down into syllables, pronounce them correctly, give them a student-friendly definition, give some examples and non-examples. Sometimes it's hard with technical words, and so we have to really think about it. Yes, no, activity, or sentence done. So be thinking about this all day, every day. So every time you have vocabulary, you want to be thinking about this work, and it takes some planning and some prep, and then it becomes habitual as we work together. One of the ways to help you with the habitual routine is this card, and I included it in your materials for you, and I've seen a lot of teachers run this off on cardstock and laminate it, and I've also seen them blow it up on a poster and just put it right by their teaching area. So you'll notice that all of the steps are here that we just went through. So number 1, introduce the word. It's written. The kids repeat it with you, so you say the word's reluctant. What word? Reluctant. Great. Then the next, and I would actually add, you would break it into syllables. So reluctant. So this word is reluctant. What's the word? Reluctant. Let's read it together by parts. Reluctant. Blend together. Reluctant. What's the word? Reluctant. Right. Then you go to step 2. Reluctant means you're not sure you want to do something. You're hesitant. When you are not sure you want to do something, you are reluctant. Okay? Doesn't take long. Student-friendly definition and explanation. Number 3, examples and non-examples. So this is a time for ELL kids where you can bring in a concrete example. Some words are really easy. Reluctant would be hard to bring in a concrete example of something that was reluctant. So you could do a visual representation or a verbal example. Sometimes the more abstract the word, the more it depends on your verbal examples. So if your mother asked you to try a new food, you might be reluctant. You may be reluctant to watch a scary movie. You are probably not reluctant to sit on your grandpa's lap and read a story. You probably are not reluctant to go snow machining upriver to catch fish. So again, examples. This routine has examples, and I would encourage you to add non-examples. Then checking kids' understanding. So here's another place where you bring in examples, non-examples. Why would a student be reluctant to go to a new school? Tell your partners. A new student might be reluctant to go to a new school because, which is a sentence stem. Okay. Would you be reluctant to go to recess on a warm summer day, yes or no? No, yes. Tell your partner something you would be reluctant to do. I would be reluctant to jump into the sea when the ice has just broken out. Okay, very good. So this is a routine that we have found to be very effective with our instruction because, number 1, it's habitual. Number 2, it's deliberate and requires preparation. And number 3, it's efficient. And with the volume of vocabulary instruction that lies ahead of us, we really need to think about those things. So folks who have really put this into practice now actually don't even have to have the sheet in front of them. They're just used to this routine. The kids are used to the routine, and it helps them take the words in a good way. Okay, so I hope that's helpful for you. 2 other things that I'd like to show you. This is the Freyer model, and it has actually many characteristics of the routine I just showed you. For example, On the top left, that's a definition in their own words. So quadrilateral is a shape with 4 sides. So the word goes in the middle. Then on the right, you see facts and characteristics or attributes. That might be another word I would add to this, would be attributes. What is an attribute of a quadrilateral? It has 4 sides. The 4 sides may or may not be of equal length, and the sides may or may not be parallel. So those are 3 attributes of a quadrilateral. On the bottom, non-examples. Actually, let's go to the bottom left. Examples. A square, a rectangle, trapezoid, rhombus, those are quadrilaterals. On the right, non-examples. Circle, triangle, pentagon, dodecahedron. They are not quadrilaterals. So this is a wonderful graphic organizer to help with kids for extended instruction. One of the things we have learned with graphic organizers is depending on the skill level of your kids, that's how you decide whether the graphic organizer should be filled in for them completely, whether it should be filled in for them partially, or whether it should be filled in for them hardly at all. So when you have high-achieving kids who can really move at a rapid rate, who have familiarity with the word, then they're able to fill in the graphic organizer. But I also want us to think about efficiency because we don't have extra time in our instruction. Our days are so packed with so many expectations and requirements. I have found that when teachers actually have this graphic organizer filled in and teach from it, we get a better result than having an empty graphic organizer for kids to fill in, because you can pack so much instruction into the teaching of the content within the organizer. The organizer really helps the teacher be specific and focused and clear and unambiguous. As we mentioned in the very beginning, vocabulary instruction should be clear and unambiguous. This graphic organizer helps the teacher really attend to that. And it is a tool for kids to go back later for review. So it's not about filling in the graphic organizer, it's about teaching from it. This is just another way to look at nuances of words. One of the things we found with kids who are learning English or who do not have a deep academic vocabulary or a deep, robust vocabulary is that this can kind of help. It's really about the nuances of words. So the word might be large. Let's say the word is large. So there are things on both sides of the word large that can help kids understand it. Large isn't probably a word I would actually teach for a Tier 2 word, but it's in the middle, so I'm going to pick it. My husband is an English language learner. Many of you know that he speaks 5 languages, and English was his last to learn. Many times in our marriage, the idea of nuances of words comes forth, and it actually can create conflict for us. For example, my husband might want to say a given word, but he doesn't have all the nuances of words in between, so he will choose a very strong word. Like he might want to use the word suggest. So the word suggest can go all the way over to insist or demand. And so sometimes he will say to me, I insist on that. And you know, as you can imagine, that's not my favorite thing to hear him say, I insist. And if I can just be patient for a moment and double check with him, what he really means is suggest or recommend. But he doesn't have a large range of vocabulary related to that concept. So he'll reach out and grab the strongest word that he can think of because he's trying to convey his message. So this is a way we can help kids. So large, say the word is large. And then there's an array of word nuances that go with the word large, all the way from small, and you could even use tiny, minuscule. So you could go on the right of this nuance chart a long way. And the same could be true for the left. So large, huge, gigantic. Actually, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other words I would use, but I imagine you can. So that helps kids understand the nuance of the word and kind of where the word fits in the array of other words around it. So many times I've seen teachers put up the word, And then if you want to kind of frame it for kids, you can put the word in the middle and circle it that you're going to be working with. And then you can take the end of the right array and the left and put a word there like small and gigantic. So let's say that this chart has large and then it has small and gigantic. So the kids know their job is to find the nuanced words in between large and small, in between gigantic and large, and find all the words that they can put in that array. A lot of times I see that teachers do this most effectively with their kids' whole group for a while before they turn them loose on it. They give them some guided practice. So it's just a concept for you that you might think about, and we have found it to be really effective for kids in not only understanding that one word of large, but they get exposure to 5 or 6 or 7 other words related to the word large. Okay? Very good. Okay. So now we're going to go back before we close today and think about all the things we learned and your areas, and go back to the places where you said you would like to do a little bit better job in your instruction for vocabulary. So thinking about your varied explicit instructional approaches. Today, through the videos and through a couple of other pieces of work, we saw explicit vocabulary instruction. We saw choosing the words and choosing the targeted words in any content of instruction. How are your student-friendly definitions? How do you do with helping kids understand the definition of a word quickly and accurately? And then how do you do with your routines? Did you learn some things today that could help you with your vocabulary routine in your instruction all day long? And then the gradual release of responsibility. So if you go back to Anita's the routine with the red card, the beginning of that work is the teacher teaching, and then by the end, the kids are actually using the word in a sentence stem or answering questions related to that word. So that chart, that red routine, moves you through the gradual release of responsibility model. And then how do you do in frequent and multiple exposures? So if you use that routine card and you really follow it, you've actually exposed the kids to that word in a lot of different contexts. And then we didn't really talk much today about distributed practice, but the research shows us that if we only talk about the word on that given day that we teach it, they're not likely actually to learn it. We have to build in our distributed practice over time. And then about your engagement. Are you one who has kids look words up in the dictionary and write them down, or are you working on being an instructor that actually provides them many more opportunities for student response and engagement than that? So I'd like you to think for a minute. I'm actually going to give you a second to think about something that was confirmed or new today in the session. There's so much more work for us to do on vocabulary. This is just really a beginning and an entry piece. We have lots and lots and lots of work to do. Think about one thing that was confirmed or some things that were confirmed or new for you today, and turn and talk to your partner. And if you are alone, give some thought to that, and then you will be able to close the webinar. So it's been a pleasure working with you today. I hope you found a couple of things you can tuck into your instruction in a deliberate and habitual way for vocabulary. We will see you next time on Comprehension. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.